You know that feeling when you return to your childhood home after years away, expecting a bittersweet reunion with old memories, only to find out someone's stolen the family silverware. And by silverware, I mean 2,100 acres of farmland? No? Just me? Well, buckle up, because that's exactly what happened when I, Ethan Johnson, stepped back onto the creaky porch of my late mother's farmhouse in Pine Grove Valley. What was supposed to be a solemn homecoming turned into the opening act of the most absurd battle of my life. A battle against an HOA so delusional they thought they could annex my family's legacy like it was some overgrown backyard garden. It all started with a knock on the door. Not a friendly welcome back knock, mind you. This was the kind of knock that screamed, "We're here to ruin your day." Standing on the porch was Karen Thompson, the president of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Yes, her name was actually Karen. She had the haircut to match and a smile so fake it could have been printed on a Hallmark card. Flanking her were two men in polo shirts emblazoned with the HOA logo, each holding clipboards like they were about to issue citations for breathing too loudly. "You must be Helen Johnson's son," Karen said, extending a manicured hand that I reluctantly shook. "We were so sorry to hear about her passing." "Thanks," I replied cautiously. "But what brings the HOA out here? This farm isn't part of your development." Karen's smile tightened like she'd just bitten into a lemon. "Well, that's actually why we're here. There are some covenant violations we need to discuss." "Covenant violations?" I repeated, blinking in confusion. "This farm has been here since 1920. Your neighborhood's been around for what? 10 years? 15, she corrected sharply. "And while that may have been true once, your mother never officially contested our annexation of this property. According to county records filed 5 years ago, this land now falls under our jurisdiction." My stomach dropped faster than a bad roller coaster ride. "That's impossible." Karen handed me an official-looking document with a flourish, like she was presenting me with a Nobel Prize for gullibility. "These papers were filed while your mother was still the owner. As you can see, the Meadowbrook Association's boundaries were legally expanded to include this property." I stared at the signature at the bottom. It looked like Mom's handwriting, but something about it felt off, like when you see a knockoff designer bag that spells Gucci with 3 C's. "There must be some mistake," I said firmly. "My mother would never agree to this." Karen ignored me and gestured toward the barn with one perfectly manicured finger. "Those farm vehicles are in violation of our storage ordinances, and that fence needs to be brought up to code. We'll give you 30 days to address these issues before fines begin." With that, she turned on her heel and strutted back to her luxury SUV like she just conquered Rome. Her clipboard minions followed close behind, leaving me standing there clutching what felt like a death warrant for my family's legacy. That night, I couldn't sleep. Mom's paperwork was scattered across the kitchen table. Tax forms, medical bills, land deeds dating back to my great-grandfather. Anything that might explain how an HOA could waltz in and claim ownership of our farm like it was an unclaimed parking spot at Walmart. Something about Karen's documents kept nagging at me. Why would Mom ever sign away control of our land? I pulled out the old filing cabinet from her office, the one she always kept locked. The key had hung on a chain around her neck for as long as I could remember. Now it sat in my pocket alongside memories I wasn't ready to unpack. Inside the bottom drawer, hidden beneath photo albums and faded receipts, I found a leather-bound journal with 3 words scrawled across the cover. "Keep fighting." My hands trembled as I opened it. The journal was a treasure trove of Mom's battles with the HOA, harassment over our tractor being visible from the road, complaints about roosters crowing too early, threats over the height of our corn. Yes, apparently corn can violate HOA regulations. But more disturbing were her notes about land surveys mysteriously changing overnight and property line markers moving without explanation. The final entry stopped me cold. "They're taking advantage of my illness. I don't have the strength to fight them anymore. God forgive me for failing to protect what my father and his father built." Tears blurred my vision as I flipped through pages filled with evidence Mom had painstakingly collected. Photos of original boundary markers, copies of real property lines, even recordings of conversations with HOA board members. On the last page was a sticky note with a name and phone number. Sarah Winters, attorney. Beneath it were 3 words underlined twice. Call when ready. As if on cue, headlights swept across the living room window. I peeked through the curtains and saw Karen Thompson sitting in her Mercedes at the edge of our driveway, snapping pictures of our property under cover of darkness. Sleep didn't come that night. Not because I wasn't tired, but because something inside me had shifted. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about justice for my mother and every sleepless night she'd endured fighting these people alone. By dawn, I knew 3 things for certain. 1, the HOA had falsified documents. 2, they'd taken advantage of my mother's illness. 3, they had no idea who they were messing with. And so began my quest. Not just to reclaim 2,100 acres of farmland, but to remind Karen Thompson and her clipboard-wielding cronies that some battles aren't fought in courtrooms or board meetings, but in fields where roots run deeper than their shallow ambitions could ever reach. If there's one thing I've learned about HOAs, it's that they operate with the subtlety of a wrecking ball and the ethics of a used car salesman offering low mileage. After Karen Thompson's little stunt on my porch, I decided it was time to dig deeper into the swamp of HOA bureaucracy. Spoiler alert, the deeper you dig, the worse it smells. My first stop was Sarah Winters, the attorney whose name my mom had scribbled in her journal. Sarah's office was tucked away in a strip mall between a vape shop and a taxidermy studio, which somehow felt appropriate for someone who specializes in tearing apart HOA scams. She greeted me with a knowing smile and an air of confidence that suggested she'd seen every HOA horror story imaginable, and probably defeated them all. "So," Sarah said, flipping through the stack of documents I'd brought, "they're claiming your property falls under their jurisdiction because of an annexation 5 years ago?" "Exactly," I replied, "but my mom never agreed to it." Sarah raised an eyebrow and tapped her pen against the table. "Annexations can be tricky. They require consent from the property owner. And if your mom didn't sign off on this, we might be looking at fraud." "Fraud?" I echoed, leaning forward like a kid hearing juicy gossip for the first time. Sarah nodded. "It's not uncommon for HOAs to push through annexations using shady tactics, altered surveys, forged signatures, or exploiting loopholes in local regulations. Let me guess. Your mom was sick at the time." I felt my stomach twist. "She had cancer." Sarah sighed and leaned back in her chair. Classic HOA move. They prey on vulnerable homeowners who don't have the energy to fight back. But don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of this. Over the next week, Sarah worked her magic, combing through county records and HOA filings like Sherlock Holmes with a coffee addiction. Meanwhile, I decided to do some sleuthing of my own. If Karen Thompson thought she could intimidate me with her clipboard army, she clearly underestimated my ability to be both petty and persistent. First, I requested copies of Meadowbrook HOA's governing documents, their CC and RS, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. These are essentially their rulebook, and let me tell you, reading them was like diving headfirst into bureaucratic nonsense. They had rules for everything: lawn height, mailbox color, even acceptable shades of beige for house paint. But buried among the drivel was something interesting. Annexations required unanimous approval from all board members and written consent from affected property owners. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to confront Karen at the next HOA meeting. Now, if you've never attended an HOA meeting before, imagine a room full of people arguing over whether azaleas or hydrangeas are more aesthetically pleasing. It's as thrilling as it sounds. Karen presided over the meeting like a dictator addressing her loyal subjects, complete with PowerPoint slides detailing new fines for unauthorized bird feeders. When it was my turn to speak, I strode up to the podium with all the confidence of someone who knows they're about to ruin someone's day. "Karen," I began, holding up a copy of their CC and RS like it was evidence in a courtroom drama, "can you explain how Meadowbrook legally annexed my family's farm without my mother's written consent?" Karen's smile faltered for a split second before she recovered with practiced politeness. "The annexation was approved by our board and filed with the county." "Interesting," I said, flipping to the relevant section of their CC and RS, "because according to your own rules, annexations require unanimous board approval and written consent from property owners. So unless you have my mother's signature on file, Karen's face turned redder than a tomato at peak ripeness. "The documents were reviewed by our legal team," she stammered. "Great," I said cheerfully. "Then you won't mind sharing those documents with me, or better yet, with my attorney." The room fell silent except for the sound of Karen furiously clicking her pen like it might summon reinforcements. She muttered something about confidentiality before abruptly adjourning the meeting. Back at Sarah's office, things were heating up faster than a microwave burrito. She'd uncovered discrepancies in Meadowbrook's annexation filings, surveys that didn't match original property lines, and signatures that looked suspiciously similar to Karen's handwriting. "This is enough to take them to court," Sarah declared triumphantly. But before we could file anything official, Karen decided to escalate things in true HOA fashion. She sent me a notice demanding immediate removal of my barn because it violated their architectural guidelines. Now, let me tell you about this barn. It's been standing since 1940 and has more character than half the houses in Meadowbrook combined. But according to Karen's letter, its rustic aesthetic clashed with their community standards. I couldn't help but laugh as I read her demands, because if Karen wanted war over aesthetics, I was more than ready to fight back. That weekend, I painted the barn bright pink with neon green polka dots, a bold statement that screamed both "screw you" and "I dare you." The neighbors loved it, Karen did not. By Monday morning, she was back at my doorstep with another clipboard and what appeared to be steam coming out of her ears. "This is unacceptable," she fumed. "You're violating our guidelines." "Funny," I replied innocently. "Your guidelines don't apply here, remember? My property isn't part of Meadowbrook." Karen sputtered incoherently before storming off in defeat. Meanwhile, Sarah filed our lawsuit against Meadowbrook HOA for fraudulent annexation and harassment. The case quickly gained attention in local media. Apparently, people love stories about rogue HOAs getting their comeuppance, and soon enough Karen found herself facing public scrutiny alongside legal trouble. As Sarah predicted, Meadowbrook folded faster than cheap lawn furniture under pressure from both the court system and angry residents tired of Karen's antics. But while justice was sweet, and oh boy was it sweet, I couldn't help but savor one final victory, watching Karen drive past my polka-dotted barn every day knowing she'd lost not just her battle, but her dignity too. And that was worth every gallon of paint. If you thought Karen Thompson was going to take her public humiliation and legal troubles lying down, you clearly don't know the depths of HOA pettiness. After our lawsuit hit the local news, Karen went from clipboard-wielding tyrant to full-blown Bond villain. She wasn't just trying to win anymore, she wanted revenge. And by revenge, I mean she unleashed a flurry of HOA notices so absurd they could have been written by a drunk toddler with a grudge. The first notice arrived bright and early Monday morning, taped to my mailbox like some kind of passive-aggressive ransom note. It read, "Your property is in violation of HOA noise ordinances due to excessive rooster crowing." Now, I'll admit a rooster, Cluck Norris, has a healthy set of pipes, but noise ordinances? On a farm? That's like complaining about water being wet. I crumpled up the notice and tossed it into the trash, thinking that would be the end of it. Oh, how naive I was. By Wednesday, Karen had escalated to citing me for unauthorized wildlife activity. Apparently, the deer that occasionally wandered onto my land were now considered trespassers under HOA regulations. I half expected her next letter to demand I install tiny "no trespassing" signs for the squirrels. But Karen's piece de resistance came on Friday when she sent a formal complaint about unlicensed agricultural operations. Yes, you heard that right, she was accusing me of running an illegal farm on my own family's land. The irony was so thick you could spread it on toast. It was like accusing a fish of swimming without a permit. At this point, it was clear Karen wasn't just trying to enforce rules, she was trying to break me. But what she didn't realize was that I thrive on chaos. If she wanted a war of attrition, I was more than happy to oblige. My first move? Cutting off Meadowbrook's beef supply. You see, what Karen and her HOA cronies failed to grasp was that my farm wasn't just any farm, it was the farm supplying premium grass-fed beef to every high-end grocery store and restaurant in Pine Grove Valley. And guess who made up a significant chunk of those customers? That's right, Meadowbrook residents. So I made a few calls. By a few, I mean every single one of my distributors. Effective immediately, all deliveries to Meadowbrook addresses were canceled. No steaks for their backyard barbecues. No burgers for their block parties. If they wanted meat, they'd have to settle for whatever sad shrink-wrapped mystery cuts they could find at the local discount mart. The fallout was immediate and glorious. By Saturday afternoon, Meadowbrook's Facebook group, normally a cesspool of arguments over lawn ornaments, had erupted into full-blown panic. Posts ranged from "Why is there no beef at Whole Foods" to "Does anyone know where I can buy organic ribeye?" One particularly distraught resident even suggested forming a carpool to drive 2 towns over for meat. It was chaos, and I loved every second of it. Karen, however, was not amused. She showed up at my farm that evening in her usual uniform, designer blazer, pearls, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Ethan," she began through gritted teeth, "we need to talk." "Sure thing," I said cheerfully, leaning against the fence post like I didn't have a care in the world. She took a deep breath as if summoning every ounce of patience in her body. "We've noticed some disruptions in your supply chain." "Oh," I said innocently. "You mean the beef?" "Yeah, funny thing about that, I decided to prioritize customers who don't harass me with bogus fines." Karen's eye twitched so violently I thought she might spontaneously combust. "This is extortion." "No," I corrected with a grin. "This is capitalism." Karen stormed off in a huff, but not before muttering something about taking this matter to the next level. Whatever that meant. The next level turned out to be an emergency HOA meeting held specifically to discuss the beef crisis. Yes, they actually called it that, as if they were dealing with an international incident instead of a neighborhood barbecue shortage. Naturally, I attended as an observer, and by observer, I mean instigator. The meeting started with Karen delivering an impassioned speech about how my actions were threatening the very fabric of Meadowbrook society. She painted me as some kind of rogue cattle baron hellbent on destroying their way of life. When she finished her tirade, one brave soul raised his hand and asked the question everyone else was thinking: "Can't we just apologize and buy beef from him again?" Karen shot him a glare so icy it could have frozen lava. "We do not negotiate with bullies," she snapped. "Actually," I interjected from the back row, "I prefer entrepreneur." The room erupted into murmurs as Karen turned her death glare on me. "What are you even doing here?" "Just enjoying the show," I replied with a shrug. That's when things took an unexpected turn. One by one, residents started voicing their frustrations, not just about the beef shortage but about Karen's leadership in general. Complaints ranged from her micromanaging tendencies, she fined me for having mismatched patio furniture, to her questionable use of HOA funds, "Why are we paying $10,000 for decorative street signs?" By the end of the meeting, it was clear Karen's iron grip on Meadowbrook was slipping faster than butter on a hot skillet. And while I'd love to take credit for orchestrating her downfall, all I really did was give people an excuse to stand up for themselves and maybe miss out on steak dinners for a week or two. As the meeting adjourned in disarray, Karen shot me one last look, a mix of fury and defeat, and stormed out without another word. I watched her go with a satisfied smirk. The war wasn't over yet, not by a long shot, but for the first time since this whole mess began, it felt like the tide was turning in my favor. And let me tell you, victory never tasted so sweet, even without steak on the menu. You'd think after the beef crisis debacle, Karen Thompson would take a step back, maybe reevaluate her life choices, and consider a career change like, say, professional dog walking or selling essential oils. But no. Karen wasn't the kind of person to admit defeat. She was the kind of person who'd double down even when her chips were on fire. And double down she did. The next salvo in Karen's war against me came in the form of a lawsuit. Yes, you read that right, she actually filed a lawsuit against me for economic sabotage. According to her legal filing, my decision to cut off beef supplies had caused irreparable harm to Meadowbrook's reputation and financial stability. Never mind the fact that HOA reputations are about as stable as a Jenga tower during an earthquake. When I received the summons, I couldn't help but laugh. Not just because the lawsuit was absurd on every level, but because it was so quintessentially Karen. She wasn't just trying to win anymore, she was trying to make me regret ever existing. Unfortunately for her, regret isn't really in my vocabulary. Sarah Winters, my attorney/legal warrior, took one look at the lawsuit and burst out laughing. "This is ridiculous," she said, flipping through the pages like she was reading a particularly bad novel. "Economic sabotage? You're not running an international cartel, you're running a farm." "Tell that to Karen," I replied dryly. Sarah smirked and set the papers aside. "Don't worry. We'll handle this." And handle it we did. The court date arrived faster than expected, and let me tell you, it was an event. Karen showed up dressed like she was auditioning for Law and Order, complete with a power suit and a binder so thick it could have doubled as body armor. Her lawyer, a guy named Chad who looked like he spent more time at the golf course than in court, stood beside her with an expression that screamed, "I'm billing by the hour." Meanwhile, Sarah and I walked in like we owned the place. She carried a slim folder containing all the evidence we needed to dismantle Karen's case piece by piece. I carried a coffee cup with "World's Best Farmer" printed on it because, well, why not? The proceedings kicked off with Karen's lawyer delivering an opening statement so dramatic it could have been nominated for an Oscar. He described Meadowbrook as a thriving community brought to its knees by one man's reckless actions. Apparently, my decision to stop selling beef had turned Meadowbrook into some kind of dystopian wasteland where residents were forced to eat tofu and frozen fish sticks. When it was our turn to respond, Sarah stood up with the confidence of someone who knows they're about to win before they even start. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about economic sabotage, it's about one HOA president's vendetta against my client." She proceeded to lay out our defense with surgical precision, how Karen had harassed me with bogus fines, how she'd exploited her position to push through fraudulent annexation documents, and how her lawsuit was nothing more than an attempt to retaliate after her schemes were exposed. But the real piece de resistance came when Sarah presented our evidence, specifically recordings of Karen admitting during HOA meetings that she wanted to teach Ethan Johnson a lesson. The courtroom fell silent as Karen's voice echoed through the speakers. "He thinks he can defy us? I'll make him regret it." Karen's face turned so red I thought she might spontaneously combust. By the time Sarah finished her closing argument, it was clear we'd won, not just legally but morally. The judge dismissed Karen's lawsuit with prejudice, a fancy legal term meaning don't even think about bringing this nonsense back, and ordered Meadowbrook HOA to pay all court costs. As we walked out of the courthouse, Sarah turned to me with a grin. "That felt good." "Better than good," I replied. "That felt great." But while the legal battle was over, I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. See, Karen had spent months trying to ruin my life. She'd harassed me with fines, tried to steal my land, and dragged me through court over something as ridiculous as beef shortages. And while I'm not usually one for grudges, this wasn't just personal, it was principle. So I decided it was time for one final act of petty revenge. The next morning, I sent out invitations to every resident in Meadowbrook for an event called Farm Fest. The flyer promised free food, including premium grass-fed beef, live music, and tours of my newly renovated barn, which still sported its bright pink paint job and neon green polka dots. To my surprise and Karen's horror, almost everyone showed up. The event was a roaring success. Families wandered through the fields admiring the cows, kids played tag around Cluck Norris's coop, and neighbors who'd previously been at each other's throats over lawn ornaments bonded over burgers fresh off the grill. Karen showed up halfway through looking like she'd bitten into a lemon and then realized it was actually a grenade. She tried to rally her clipboard minions into boycotting the event but quickly discovered that free steak has a way of winning people over. By the end of the day, Meadowbrook residents were openly questioning why they'd ever let Karen run their HOA in the first place. Some even suggested voting her out entirely, a prospect that made her storm off in defeat yet again. As I stood on my porch watching cars drive away, I couldn't help but smile. The war was over, not just legally but socially, and while victory tasted sweet before, now it tasted downright delicious. And yes, I made sure Karen got her invitation too, along with a coupon for tofu burgers, just in case she wanted something more economically sustainable. After Farm Fest, you'd think Karen Thompson would finally throw in the towel, pack up her clipboard, and retreat to whatever HOA lair she crawled out of. But no, Karen wasn't just stubborn, she was the kind of person who'd try to win a staring contest with a mirror. And while she was officially dethroned as HOA president, thank you democracy, she still found ways to meddle like a mosquito that refuses to die no matter how many times you swat it. Her final act of defiance came in the form of an anonymous letter, though let's be real, it had Karen written all over it. The letter accused me of undermining community values and promoting divisiveness through agricultural elitism. Agricultural elitism. As if raising cows and growing corn is somehow equivalent to hosting exclusive yacht parties. It was so ridiculous I almost framed it. But Karen's antics weren't my problem anymore. Meadowbrook residents had officially turned on her, and my farm had become the unofficial hub for neighborhood gatherings. People who used to argue over mailbox colors were now bonding over hay rides and barbecue nights. Even Cluck Norris had achieved local celebrity status. Kids started calling him the King of Roosters, which I'm pretty sure went straight to his head. Meanwhile, the legal victory against Meadowbrook HOA opened up new opportunities for my farm. With the annexation officially nullified, I was finally free to expand operations without Karen breathing down my neck. I partnered with local businesses to supply fresh produce and meat, launched a farm-to-table delivery service, and even started hosting workshops on sustainable farming practices. Turns out people love learning how to grow tomatoes without accidentally killing them. But the best part? Watching Karen drive past my polka-dotted barn every day, knowing she'd lost not just her power but her dignity. She tried her best to ignore it, but I swear I caught her glaring at those neon green polka dots more than once. It was like watching someone lose a staring contest with a very colorful wall. As for Meadowbrook itself, the community underwent a transformation that felt straight out of a feel-good movie. Without Karen micromanaging their lives, residents started working together to make their neighborhood better, not through fines and regulations but through actual cooperation. They planted community gardens, organized charity drives, and even repainted those infamous decorative street signs, which, by the way, still cost $10,000. Thanks for that, Karen. One day, as I was loading crates of beef into the delivery truck, an elderly couple from Meadowbrook stopped by to thank me. "You've done more for this community than that HOA ever did," the husband said with a smile. His wife nodded. "And your steaks are phenomenal." It was moments like these that reminded me why fighting back had been worth it. Not just for my family's legacy, but for everyone who'd ever been bullied by people like Karen Thompson. Of course, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. Running a farm is hard work, and there were days when I questioned whether it was all worth it. Especially when Cluck Norris decided to stage a coup and chase me around the yard like some feathered dictator. But every time I looked out at those rolling fields or heard kids laughing during hayrides, I knew I wouldn't trade this life for anything. As for Karen, well, rumor has it she moved out of Meadowbrook shortly after losing her position as HOA president. Apparently, she couldn't handle living in a community where people actually liked each other, or maybe she just couldn't stand driving past my barn every day. Either way, good riddance. In the end, justice wasn't just served. It was grilled medium rare and paired with a side of victory fries. My family's farm was safe, Meadowbrook was thriving without Karen's tyranny, and Cluck Norris continued his reign as Pine Grove Valley's most infamous rooster. So what's the moral of this story? Simple. Never underestimate the power of petty revenge, and always keep your beef supply under lock and key. If you enjoyed hearing about my battle against HOA tyranny, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends who've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, comment your favorite part below, and subscribe for more tales of chaos and triumph. Thanks for watching.